Hello, I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Is that just a nod in the chat would be appreciated, or otherwise I may well be talking to myself. Excellent. No, thank you. So thank you for staying with us. We're into the last session now, and the focus of this really, I suppose, is thinking about the kind of strategy and policy implications of some of the things that we've heard this afternoon. So I'm very much hoping that what we'll be able to do is to bring all of the panel onto the stage. And I've really got some kind of overarching kind of questions, and I'm going to go around the panel in turn, but I'm very open if we can solicit some questions through the chat if anyone has anything that they'd like to pick up. During the break, one of the questions was particularly picking up on the last session around the diversity challenge and what might be something that we can do in that space. But so I'd like to welcome the panel that have made it onto the stage and got their cameras on. I know that the technology is not quite flawless, but we are almost there. And perhaps as we go round, I'm going to really kind of pick up on some of the big topics. We've heard, obviously, about the nature of the toolkit, some of the things that the project's been doing, some of the challenges from the perspective, if you like, of the businesses and the importance that using these kinds of approaches actually brings. But with the panel today, I suppose we've got that range of perspectives, including now on the stage, the Challenge Director, Stephen Browning. And I suppose that, Stephen, if I could come to you first, which may or may not be a relief, thinking about what we have kind of achieved across the ISCF Challenge and being that pioneer fund, there was a kind of a push on productivity about driving the competitiveness and the future of services. I just wonder, kind of given this is the final session, and as we go around maybe picking up on the perspectives of the other panel members, could you just give us a kind of a high-level overview of what some of the achievements more broadly of the challenge have been and what's looking to be on the cards next?
Sure, thanks. So for the Next Generation Services Challenge, which maybe not everyone is overly familiar, what we were intending to do was support the accountancy, insurance and legal services sectors with their development and use of AI and data technologies more broadly. And we were trying to look at both the technical aspects, but also very much the human behavioral side of things, because technology is all well and good, but it's normally when people get involved that things go wrong or go well. And what we've seen in the program so far, it's been running just over 2.5 years, is that we've managed to support the development of a good number of technologies. But for me, more importantly, we've managed to support the development and growth of a number of small businesses and an increasing understanding of how innovation can happen within these sectors. So some of the highlights that I particularly like, we have one company that applied to us 2 weeks into their existence with 2 people on board, a company called Orbital Witness, and they are now 22 people strong, have a market cap of, I think it's £7.5 million, having started with 56k of funding from their founders, and have 22 insurance companies, large insurance companies and large law firms as their clients. So this type of support can really make a difference for that type of company. And then the other sorts of areas that we're seeing progress in, still some time to go, is sharing of data or increasing access to data rather than sharing across a number of the sectors. So we have 4 consortia that are building platforms and approaches to help the accountancy, insurance and legal services sectors to increase their sort of, as I say, access to data rather than sharing, so that people can build innovation on top of those. And then there's, of course, the stuff we've heard about today, the sort of design sprint stuff in particular. I think one of the key things that that I've learned is how much of a cultural shift there might need to be within these professional services in comparison to my background, which is more in software, to understand how to engage with innovation. And I think the design sprint approach has shown a real benefit for that in helping people to understand how they might engage.
Okay, thank you very much for that. John, if I could come to you next, and we've heard this afternoon, and kind of Stephen said there again about it's not the technology that's the problem, it's the kind of the challenges, if you like, for the organisations. And I guess in your position and given your background with Grant Thornton, I believe, and also the kind of position now with the IOD and talking to government about this, how are you seeing this kind of playing out with your members? What's the kind of sense of the challenge? What are the things the project kept coming up against? Richard refers to this kind of tipping point where we see eventually these things will come into existence. But what are the barriers, if you like, that you're seeing across the remit that you have that representation for?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak today, and I've been listening with interest to other speakers this afternoon. I think one of the things, perhaps just to give a flavour, the Institute of Directors, essentially we do three things. So we connect our members one to another, peer to peer. We develop them in terms of their skills, in terms of being the best directors they can be through our skills program. And then we work with them to influence government in this instance, both at a local, nations and national level, on the things that affect directors. And we've got a particular issue coming up very fast in the white paper on audit reform and corporate governance coming out tomorrow. May not be widely known, but it is coming out tomorrow. And this goes to the heart of what is happening in the professions. My experience in professions, I was 10 years in China, bringing together 5 firms in China under Grant Thornton, and prior to that in PwC. But I think the core of this question relates to so what? And actually getting the attention of senior individuals, either be at government level or at firm level, to take this thing seriously. Has been very difficult, I think, really for many decades. Fortunately, and this is an awful thing to say, COVID has changed all that. Now, COVID has brought with it terrible suffering, a significant amount of pain and torment in the business sector. But it has done, and an earlier speaker said this, it's accelerated digital change and it's accelerated innovation, compressed that 6 years worth into 6 months. And I think this is really the key critical thing. It's taking, I think Winston Churchill once said, never waste a good crisis. And that is the challenge for business right now. It's actually a challenge when we're speaking to governments. So we just had the budget, talking to Rishi Sunak and the Treasury. That they are looking very much at 3 critical areas for the UK economy. One is absolutely around innovation. So that is this hits the spot in terms of encouraging government to fund and encouraging business to take up the challenge of innovation. And I was very heartened earlier on. This innovation is to hear that innovation is not about technology. Innovation is about people thinking differently. And what this has allowed us to do, we've seen many instances during COVID, allow organizations, often with their backs to the wall, and that's no team is as good as a team that's got its backs against the wall. But it's allowed organizations to pivot to a different direction that they never thought possible. And I think that is going to be about being brave. So one of the things that I think we're seeing now is the ability of leaders to be brave. Now, I hope that other people will take that up. But the challenge is that not enough brave leaders exist right now. And that is one of the issues that we see, because taking opportunity out of challenge requires bravery. You've got to be prepared to bet the farm. And in this instance, when the farm may go bust, that's a very mind-focusing time. But that would be my immediate sort of view on this.
No, thanks for that, John. And it's interesting, I suppose, thinking back to the 2.5 years for which this fund has been kind of supporting projects. And even the time before that in setting it up, I think trying to get that traction and that engagement within the professions, because of the nature of what Next Gen PSF as a pioneer fund has been doing, I think was something where there was that apprehension. It isn't something that this particular sector is used to. And I think in pockets now, we are kind of growing that interest and the recognition. Julia, if I could come to you, and I suppose thinking about this kind of from a board's perspective and given your kind of background as well, and I suppose bringing the legal perspective as well, and the challenge of that traditional sector, how we kind of invoke and distill this change. We've heard about kind of leadership, the need to to kind of risk, but also use those levers that are available. So I wonder what your kind of thoughts were on forging a way forward here about how we progress embedding and developing this agenda.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I've given quite a bit of thought to this, and as you said, I'm sort of bringing an executive leadership hat, a NED hat, and also a consulting hat. And as I've been discussing with leaders over the last year, what's really struck me is how people have had to fundamentally change how they do strategy in this new operating context. And so what I thought I might do is just share thoughts as to how design thinking and design sprints in particular are really useful techniques and tools in doing strategy in this sort of new operating context. And what I thought might be helpful is I've sort of synthesized and summarized 3 things that have changed in terms of strategy and why design thinking and sprints are particularly useful, but also what stayed the same or potentially still valid, to help people realize that design thinking and sprints are really key enablers of driving strategy. So not really about what you're looking at in strategy, but how you think about the strategic thinking process, planning process. So in terms of what's changed, really the whole approach to strategy has changed. There's much greater focus on purpose now, which needs are there, whom are we serving? There's much greater focus on values. So purpose and values as these longer term anchors, rather than the sort of tradition market position, the vision type point. And also planning cycles are much shorter now. They're much, much more dynamic to really test hypotheses, place these bets that John was talking about for sources of the growth renewal. So the whole approach to strategy has changed quite fundamentally, and purpose and values are much more key anchors, and the whole speed and the dynamic process is very different, and that plays into design thinking. The other point that's been alluded to, and one of the chat questions, was around the role of diversity, so stakeholders as well. And this is very much coming from the corporate landscape into the professional services. I'm doing quite a big study with the WEF on this at the moment. But the whole stakeholder landscape has fundamentally changed in terms of who your customers' clients are now, what they value, what your talent values, the role of the media, the role of regulators. So firms are really having to rethink who their stakeholders are and how they engage with them. And that picks up diversity, equity and inclusion to make sure those voices that haven't always been heard, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's gender, whether it's more sort of youthful voices. So design thinking, as I'll come on to in a moment, is just so beautifully placed to be much more eclectic and much more inclusive in terms of the voices you bring into the strategic thinking. And the other thing that has changed, it's been on a trend line, is really firms thinking about their own boundaries in different ways. So more porous sort of internal and external boundaries. And the recognition that to solve some of these big business opportunities and challenges, be it for clients or be it with an internal lens, you've got to partner and ally more with other firms, organisations, non-executives, academics, much more to really solve some of these big challenges. And also the mindset shift around not owning all the assets, and you don't have your arms around, you don't control all of the sort of talent and the assets. So I think those are the things that have changed in strategic thinking, the whole approach to strategy, the stakeholder landscape and the sort of boundaries around it. What has stayed the same then? Well, first of all, strategy is still always about making choices. So that has stayed the same. What will you do? What won't you do? Who will you serve? Who won't you serve? Where will you put your resources and the bets that we were talking about? The second thing is you're trying to inform a view of the future. So you're trying to sort of what might be, not from a perfect perspective, but from a sort of best estimate perspective. And that clearly plays into not just design thinking, but also the use of data and analytics. So being able to get that breadth of data in. And the third thing is around increasing the odds of your success. Strategy is not about the art of perfection, but it's about the art of sort of narrowing down your probabilities. So I think you can see from what's changed and what's stayed the same that design thinking sprints are really superb tools and techniques for strategy in the new normal, that they really help you prioritize on particular problems. They help you focus on your best bets and choices. They help you bring in a whole breadth of perspective, diversity of perspective, non-hierarchical, cross-functional, internal, external. And they help you move fast and quickly to iterate, test, and move on. They're short, they're agile, and you can adapt them. So that's what I sort of thought I'd bring to this conversation. I really can see that design thinking and design sprints can become really quite integral to a new way of doing strategy.
I think, yeah, and it's really interesting to kind of hear your perspective there, given the kind of traditional nature of some of the sectors we're talking about, how perhaps within that, I guess what we're seeing is now there is, as John alluded to, an acceptance here and a desire to kind of move down this route, think about how technology can be better utilised. But actually now it's about having the methods and not just thinking of the solutions that are out there, albeit important, and we need to develop those, but we also need to think about how they work within organisations. And I keep coming up against the kind of phrase about how the relationship between the technology and the employee or the partner and what that looks like. And Louise, if I can come on to you and bring you into the conversation, I suppose that Be the Business has had a much broader remit than the service firms, but the challenge here about digital skills, about the digital transformation more broadly, is something that obviously Be the Business has been on the front foot about for a long time. I just wondered whether you've got any thoughts about kind of, from your experience, what's worked and what hasn't, and what lessons might be translatable between some of the sectors that you've kind of been working with.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And I'll build on points that both Julia and John have made, because I think that there's some really key elements there. So I think that, as you said, Be the Business, we have been focusing on firm level kind of productivity and effectiveness. That within its own right talks to kind of innovation and actually how you can make your business as effective as it can be. And the two core elements of that we've really focused on is around leadership and management skills and capabilities. So you've got to have the skills to actually absorb the change. And then, tech adoption, but in its broadest sense, because, technology can be as advanced as you're talking about with the artificial intelligence, but also can be right back down to the basics as well. And so we've seen through the work that we've done, the fact that actually, obviously, COVID has meant that businesses have just had to innovate. And what's really interesting about small and medium-sized businesses is that actually they do it quite rapidly anyway. But actually having something like the design thinking, a toolkit, being able to have actually a processed way of doing it, I think is really applicable. And we've just recently done a productivity index. And actually what came back from that is we're seeing that up to 35% of SMEs are likely to be looking at kind of innovating their business in the next year or so, but also they're looking to do that in a bit more of a systematic and continuous way. So I think this is applicable across every sector. I think it's really interesting because from a professional services firm perspective, sometimes it's looked upon to have the answers. And actually what's really interesting as well, I think, from what we find with the things that we've done with the small and medium-sized businesses is actually things like collaboration, whether that's through, like Julia mentioned about, things like you mentoring, whether you're getting non-execs across your business, bringing in diversity of thought is absolutely critical. And back to John's point about kind of the volume of innovation, the time is now. We are seeing, and there is a step change. And I think the fact that actually we can share, we can collaborate, things like design thinking and using that collaboration and co-collaboration practice can be applicable across sectors. We can learn together, we can innovate together, and ultimately, drive towards a more productive economy. So I think it's all really, really relevant, Tim.
Okay, no, thank you for that. And John Rowland, I saw you nodding at points in that as well, and around the co-convening and trying to bring this together. And I guess your vantage point on the sector and kind of looking both at industry but also to government as well and thinking on this. Are you seeing the kind of the mood music changing, as we've kind of heard from John and Julia already, that there is that backdrop to trying to keep innovation high on the agenda?
Well, there certainly is. But I would say certainly from a political perspective, when people think of innovation, they tend to think about things rather than about services. And as a practitioner and a professional services provider myself, I'm guilty of that mindset, that when you hear about the government talk about an industrial strategy, it tends to be about making high-tech fan blades in jet engines and about Formula One and about Dyson vacuum cleaners. It's all that sort of stuff, but it's not actually about looking how you can boost productivity in what is the jewel in the crown of the British economy, which is services. And I think I'm reminded of the old quip that, technological change shows up everywhere except in the economic data. And I think maybe one thing that COVID will do is it will actually force the services sector to actually reap the benefits of the technology that's already available to us. So I think my main initial point there is that there's a role for the professional services sector in educating government as well about the importance of research and development and innovation within the services sector, and for that not to be the sort of the Cinderella of government policy. I think there's also I think a lot of lessons actually in this design sprint process for government itself and in its provision of services, and I do stress the word services again, that there are all sorts of applications there where, I think Robert Colville, who is a columnist and runs CPS, the think tank, says that good government these days is actually about effective database management, and building those databases and gaining that data is the secret to developing services. But those services, from a customer perspective or from an individual perspective, don't respect the boundaries of individual government departments. So that idea of bringing people together from different parts of government to solve common problems, so for example digital identity, or how do we have a streamlined portal for people to deal with their appointments with doctors or to pay their taxes when we've got all these fragmented systems. I think that's something that the government is really beginning to wake up to now, and we're seeing these innovation fellows being appointed to number 10. So I think there is not only is there a role for government to help the sector and to try and inculcate this idea of R&D and innovation in the professional services sector, but it needs to go back the other way as well, just for the sector to say, here are the learnings for government. This is how you can improve delivery of services through the techniques that we're developing and embracing. Because, as I say, a lot of those challenges are common across the private sector and across government as well.
It's really. I think we could pick apart the question of the nature of innovation and perceived whether it is in the services and actually whose eye that is within. And I guess one of the things that intrigues me, and Julia, if I could maybe come back to you and then John on this, is also, I guess when we've been talking to some of the legal tech firms, they certainly see themselves as innovators in this space under the services banner. But what we're not necessarily seeing is that kind of open arms acceptance of innovation in the kind of more traditional realms of the professional service. And is that something that is changing? Do you get the sense of that from the kind of view that you have?
I think in large part it is still seen to be heavily technology. It's about the tech. So it is a mindset challenge, and realizing it's about the people and the way they come together to solve, business challenges, which is why I'm so excited, putting my strategy hat on, about how design thinking and sprints can actually solve for new client demand, business model changes. Having said that, I think it is definitely changing. It is definitely on the innovation is in most professional services strategy in some format or another, but they tend to think of it as technology. Also, what I would say from the client demand point of view, and we had this discussion in one of the breakouts, many of the sort of clients are still struggling with the data point that the number of panelists have alluded to. So some of the needs, the most pressing needs, are actually around the knowledge management side. So we have still got a little bit of a challenge here around the mindsets of the partners in businesses still tending to think of technology, and the clients often needing some very basic sort of building blocks of some of the more sophisticated innovation that we would think of.
John, can I bounce that one onto you as well? Because it feels like what we're doing here is almost making technology a strategy question. And how do we kind of bring that in to really kind of utilise the strengths and skills of some of those kind of professional directors in trying to help them make these decisions that when they are seen as innovation decisions or technology decisions, that they're almost one step removed away from, and what the kind of the next step in helping that happen might be?
Big question. I mean, I think if we go back to what is the government trying to do right now, and just, I don't know if people are aware, but the industrial strategy is as Kwasi Kwarteng said the other day to me, is in the deep freeze. So the industrial strategy is in the deep freeze. And the focus of attention now is around what they call the plan for growth, which is driven by Treasury, basically. So it was sitting in BEIS, and the industrial strategy forms a challenge because BEIS has industrial strategy in its title, but I suppose I'll work that out soon. But the plan for growth is where it's at. And the three strands that the government is focusing on is around, and this goes to your question, is around skills, innovation, and infrastructure. And it's interesting when you talk to them, particularly Treasury, who are the guiding lights on this right now, with everybody trailing in the wake behind them, it is really around, they do see innovation as something broader. And that's in a very small way. We saw a little tiny chink of that in the budget, a bit of sort of Rishi Sunak's own personal whimsical approach, having been a business school. But the approach to actually encouraging, it's only a relatively small fund, but encouraging a small fund for relatively small organisations to be able to take up the opportunity for a 12-week course in digital skills and in other skills. Now, it's currently been placed through a relatively small group of business schools. But it's interesting that the government has sort of woken up in part, albeit only one part of the Treasury, to the fact that we need to develop skills outside just pure digital skills in directors and in leaders. And of course, we would subscribe to that because that's one of the core things that we do is develop the skills of directors. So I do think we're starting to see a shift in the government's mindset, and certainly talking to BEIS officials and in Kwasi, that this moved away from it. Innovation is just around digital. I think the ministers have got it. It's getting it down through the rest of government and getting it into funding. And I think we will start to see things, but I suspect it might be a bit slow. So I think it's going to be incumbent on business and the professions in particular as well to say, actually, it's not just about digital. It is about the wider range of skills across the whole of the community, from student skills to director skills that need to be looked at in order to take, if you like, brand Britain and the economy forward. I think they are starting to get it, but I think it's incumbent on us all to help them understand where we can go on this.
Okay, thank you. I'm acutely aware we're coming to time, so I'd like to thank all of the panel members for their contributions to this final discussion, and thank everyone for participating with us this afternoon. After the session's closed, my next job is to make sure that we get the white paper up on the website, and the other resources that we've developed will all be available there. So please do have a look tomorrow, have a look later this evening and see. We have started to try and identify through the white paper that Richard was leading on some of the kind of key messages for leadership teams of professional services firms thinking around challenges of flexibility, the future and strategizing around the future and alternative ways to address barriers, which I think are there, but also picking up on some of the points that John, Julia and Louise have made around the messages for policymakers as well. And really kind of, I suppose, some of the things that John's talked about thinking about the kind of the need to have a more intelligent approach towards this, thinking about the effectiveness of really changing that mindset to focus as much on the organisation as much as is the technology. Stephen, just a quick one for you, because I think that there will be people interested who are still with us. But this is presumably not the end for the next generation services, and that there is more ahead.
That would certainly be my intention. I think we've just made a start in this area. There's to my mind, a lot more to be done around the skills that have been mentioned, the engagement with innovation more broadly, adoption, diffusion aspects, and those are the ways I'm thinking the programme would go forward.
Fantastic. So, and a great point, I think, to leave on. So, what we will do is we will be sharing the recording of this and making some of the other assets available from today. But really, the journey has started, and it's been great to be able to play a part of that with the team that you've heard from today, including Richard, who I'm grateful for letting us use his virtual venue for this afternoon. So, thank you all for attending. Richard, am I to hand back to you for the final word?
Yeah, I mean, very happy to give my final word. My camera seems to have decided that it doesn't want to work today, but we are where we are. But just to say that I've certainly found today really interesting, stimulating, and I think a lot of people who missed it will find the videos really helpful as well. But thank you, Tim, for being a great leader on this team. I know that they always say that it's hard to get 2 or 3 professional firms to work together. To get 5 institutions of an academic nature to work together, I suspect is in a different league altogether. So thank you for that. Thank you for the great people I've worked with. And the project may be ending, but for me, the campaign is just beginning. That's my kind of thought.
Lovely. Thank you, Richard. Okay, thanks very much for your time, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.